I've gone back and forth on whether to talk about this. It's been almost a year now, and I still haven't really settled on what I think happened. That's the part that gets to me. Not the fear, not the things I saw or heard, but the fact that I can't file it away neatly in my head. I can't tell myself a clean story about it, and I think that's why I'm finally putting it out there. Because maybe if I just say it all out loud, start to finish, it'll stop circling in my mind the way it does at 3 in the morning when I can't sleep. I should start with the job. Last spring, I was in a rough patch. I'd been laid off from a warehouse position I'd held for about 2 years, and unemployment was running out. I wasn't being picky anymore. I was applying to anything that would take me. And when I saw a listing for a night shift orderly at St. Albans Regional Medical Center, I figured why not? The pay was decent, the hours were brutal, 11 at night to 7 in the morning, but I've always been something of a night person, and I told myself it would be temporary, a few months, maybe 6, just enough to get my feet under me again. The interview was quick, almost too quick looking back. I met with a woman from HR who seemed distracted the entire time, like she was doing 3 things at once and I was the least important of them. She asked me a handful of standard questions, confirmed I could lift 50 pounds, confirmed I had no felonies, and told me I could start the following Monday. She didn't even check my references. At the time, I thought I'd gotten lucky. Now I think they were just desperate to fill the position. St. Albans is not a small hospital. It's a big, sprawling thing on the east side of the city, built in phases over the course of about 50 years. The oldest wing dates back to the 1950s. You can tell, too, because the architecture shifts as you walk through it. The newer sections have that clean, bright, modern look you'd expect, all white walls and wide corridors, and those big windows that let in natural light. But the further you go into the older parts of the building, the more the atmosphere changes. The ceilings get lower, the hallways narrow, the fluorescent lighting takes on this faint yellowish tint like the fixtures are original and nobody's ever bothered to replace them. The floor tiles are that old speckled linoleum, cracked in places, and the walls have this heavy, institutional feel. You know the kind I mean, that thick, slightly glossy paint they put on cinder block in schools and government buildings, the kind you can feel has about 15 coats layered over each other. The 3rd floor of the East Wing was the oldest part of the hospital still in active use. That's where most of the long-term care patients were, people who weren't critical, but who weren't going home anytime soon either. A lot of elderly patients, a few people are recovering from surgeries that had complications, some patients on extended psychiatric observation, although the hospital had a separate psych unit on the 2nd floor of the North Wing for the more acute cases. The 3rd floor east was supposed to be quiet, low intensity, the kind of place where not much happens on a night shift. That's where they assigned me. My first night, I showed up about 30 minutes early because I was nervous and didn't want to make a bad impression. I parked in the nearly empty employee lot around back and walked in through a side entrance that required a badge. The security guard barely looked up from his phone. I found my way to the 3rd floor by following signs that were faded enough to make me wonder when they'd last been updated. And when I stepped off the elevator, I was met by a nurse named Dolores. Dolores was maybe 60 years old, short, heavyset, with reading glasses perched on a chain around her neck. She had the manner of someone who'd been doing this work so long that it had become entirely automatic. Not unkind, just efficient. She showed me the supply closets, walked me through the linen situation, told me which rooms were occupied and which were empty, and explained the call light system. Standard orientation stuff. I was following along, taking mental notes, when she paused at the nurse's station and reached under the counter. She pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded in half, and handed it to me. "Read this when you get a chance," she said. "Night shift has its own set of guidelines. Unofficial, but everyone follows them. You'll want to, too. I took the paper and unfolded it. It was a photocopy, slightly crooked, the text printed in a plain font. At the top it said, "3rd floor east, night shift protocol." And below that was a numbered list. I'll do my best to remember them in order, though I may be slightly off on a couple. 1. Keep the lights on in the main corridor at all times. If a light goes out, report it to maintenance immediately, but do not attempt to change the bulb yourself after midnight. 2. If a call light activates in an unoccupied room, do not respond to it. Log it in the maintenance request book and move on. 3. Do not use the east stairwell between midnight and 4 in the morning. Use the elevator or the central stairwell only. 4. If you hear footsteps in an area you know to be empty, do not investigate. Continue with your duties. 5. The supply closet at the far end of the hall near room 312 must remain locked after 11 p.m. Do not open it for any reason until 6 a.m. 6. Do not check on patient 307 after midnight. 7. If patient 307's call light activates after midnight, do not respond. Mark it in the log and inform the day shift. 8. Do not discuss patient 307 with other patients on the floor. 9. If you hear your name spoken by a voice you do not recognize, do not respond. Walk to the nurse's station and wait there for at least 5 minutes. 10. At the end of your shift, leave the floor promptly. Do not linger.
I read the list twice. Then I looked up at Dolores. She was already busy with something else, writing in a chart, and when she noticed me staring, she gave me a look that I can only describe as preemptively tired, like she'd had this conversation before and already knew how it would go. "Is this serious?" I asked. "Yes." "What's the deal with room 307? "Follow the list," she said. "That's all you need to do." And she went back to her chart. I want to be honest about how I felt at that moment. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even particularly uneasy. Mostly, I was amused. I figured it was some kind of hazing ritual for the new guy, or maybe a long-standing joke among the night shift staff. Every workplace has its quirks. I'd worked at a factory once where there was a piece of tape on the floor that everyone stepped over and nobody could tell me why. People are creatures of habit, and sometimes habits calcify into superstition. That's what I assumed was happening here. The first few hours of that shift were uneventful. I did my rounds, checked on the patients who were awake, helped an elderly man named Mr. Kowalski get to the bathroom, restocked a few supply carts, and generally tried to learn the layout. There were about 16 rooms on the floor, maybe 10 of them occupied. The wing had an L shape to it. The nurse's station sat at the bend of the L, giving partial sight lines in both directions, but not full coverage of either hallway. Room 307 was down the longer arm of the L, toward the far end. I walked past it twice during those early hours. The door was closed. There was no chart in the holder on the wall outside, which I thought was odd, and no name on the placard. I almost knocked on it the first time out of habit, but then I remembered the list and decided to leave it alone. Like I said, I wasn't scared, but I also wasn't looking to start trouble on my first night. Around 11:30, the feel of the place started to change. I don't know how to describe it without sounding like I'm being dramatic, and I promise you I'm not. It was a shift in atmosphere, almost physical, like a barometric pressure drop before a storm. The hallways, which had already been quiet, became still in a way that felt intentional, like the building was holding its breath. I noticed it first because I'd been walking, and the sound of my own footsteps seemed louder than they should have been. Too present, too echoey, like the hallway had gotten longer while I wasn't paying attention.
I passed the nurse's station and noticed Dolores had gone to the break room. Another nurse, a younger woman named Camille, was sitting at the desk. She looked up when I walked by and gave me a small nod, but there was something tight about her expression, alert in a way that went beyond professional attentiveness. I thought about asking her about the list, about room 307 specifically, but something about her posture discouraged it. She was sitting very straight, and her eyes kept drifting to the corridor monitor, the one that showed the closed-circuit camera feed of the hallway.
I went about my business. At about 1:45, I was restocking linens in the supply closet near room 302 when I heard footsteps. They came from further down the hall, toward the end, toward 307. Slow, measured footsteps, the kind you hear when someone is walking at a deliberate pace, not hurrying, not wandering, just walking with purpose. I leaned out of the supply closet and looked down the hallway. It was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed. The floor stretched out, shiny and vacant, all the way to the dead end. Nobody there. I stood still and listened. The footsteps had stopped. I almost went down there. I think under normal circumstances I would have, but the list was in my pocket, and Rule 4 came to mind, and I thought, okay, fine. Old building, strange acoustics, pipes maybe, or someone on the floor below. I went back to the linens. At midnight exactly, something happened that I still can't fully explain. Every call light on the floor activated at once. I was back at the nurse's station by then. Camille and I both looked up at the panel on the wall. All of them, every single light, lit up simultaneously and then went dark again. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds. Camille reached over and pressed a button to reset the system. She didn't say a word. She didn't even look surprised. She just reset it and went back to her work. "Does that happen often?" I asked. "Sometimes," she said, and that was the end of the conversation. Over the next hour, things got stranger in a way that was hard to pin down. It was cumulative. It wasn't any one thing that would have alarmed me on its own. It was the layering of small oddities, each one easy to explain individually, but together forming a pattern that my brain was starting to register, even if I didn't want to acknowledge it. The call light in room 310 went off 3 times. Room 310 was empty. I knew it was empty because I'd checked the patient board myself. Each time, Camille logged it without a word. The third time, I walked down to 310 and stood outside the door. I could hear a faint buzzing from inside, like the electrical system in the room was cycling. I reached for the door handle and then stopped. I don't know why. My hand was on the handle and I just didn't turn it. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds and then I walked away. At around 12:30, I was mopping the floor near the bend in the L when I looked up and saw something on the hallway monitor at the nurse's station. The monitor showed a grainy black and white feed of the corridor, and for just a moment, maybe a second or two, I saw a figure standing in front of room 307, just standing there, not moving, facing the door. I looked up from the monitor and down the actual hallway. I could see room 307's door from where I was standing. There was no one there. I looked back at the monitor. The figure was gone. I set down the mop and walked over to Camille. She was writing something, and I waited until she looked up. "I think I saw someone on the camera," I said, "outside 307. She held my gaze for a moment. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted, a kind of recognition. "It does that sometimes," she said. "The camera, it's old, glitches."
It looked like a person. I know what it looked like. That was it. She went back to writing. I stood there for a moment, feeling oddly dismissed, and then I went back to mopping, but I kept glancing at the monitor. The hallway on the screen remained empty. At around 1 in the morning, Dolores came back from her break, and Camille left to take hers. I was at the station, pretending to organize paperwork, when Dolores settled into her chair and put on her reading glasses. "You're doing fine," she said, without looking at me. I think she could tell I was unsettled, even though I hadn't said anything. "Dolores, I've just got to know, what's actually in room 307? She took off her glasses. She set them on the counter with a kind of deliberateness that told me she was choosing her words carefully. "There is a patient in room 307, she said. "The patient has been here for a very long time, longer than me, and I've been here 19 years. The patient is cared for by the day shift, specifically by a rotating team that is assigned to that room and that room only. They don't talk about it. I don't ask. What I know is what's on the list, and the list is what keeps the night shift safe. Do you understand?" "Safe from what?" "I need you to understand that I'm not being evasive to be mysterious. I'm being honest when I tell you that I don't fully know. What I know is that people who broke the rules had bad experiences. Some of them quit. One of them, a man named Gerald who worked here before you, went down to that room at about 2 in the morning because he heard someone crying. He said it sounded like a child. He opened the door. He won't talk about what he saw. He doesn't work here anymore. He doesn't work anywhere anymore, as far as I know." She put her glasses back on. "Follow the list," she said.
I didn't ask again. The next 2 hours crawled by. I did my work. I helped a patient in room 303 who couldn't sleep and wanted someone to adjust her pillows. I made a pot of coffee in the break room. I tried to keep my mind occupied, but the hospital at that hour has a way of stripping away distractions. The silence becomes a presence in itself. It presses against you, and no matter what I was doing, no matter where I was on the floor, I was aware of room 307 at the far end of the hall. It sat in my peripheral consciousness like a dark spot in your vision that you can't quite look at directly. At about 2:15, I heard whispering. I was in the hallway, walking back from room 303, and I stopped because I heard it. Very faint, very close, like someone was standing just behind me, speaking in a voice so low it was barely more than breath. I couldn't make out words. It was more like the shape of language, the cadence, the rise and fall of it, without any actual content I could parse. I turned around. The hallway was empty behind me. I stood still and listened, and the whispering faded. I walked to the nurse's station. Dolores was there. I sat down and stayed for 5 minutes, just like the list said. Dolores didn't ask why. She didn't even look up. I think she already knew. At about 2:45, the call light for room 307 activated. It came on with a soft chime, and Dolores reached over and silenced it without a moment's hesitation. She logged it, the time, the room number, and the note, "No response per protocol." She'd done it before, many times clearly. The ease of the motion told me everything. "That'll happen a few more times before morning," she said. "Don't worry about it." It activated again at 3:10 and again at 3:31. Each time Dolores silenced it and logged it. Each time I felt a small pulse of something I can only describe as wrongness, because I knew the room had a patient in it, supposedly,
and I knew that if any other call light went off, I'd be expected to respond. That was my job. That was the entire point of me being there. And yet this one room, this one patient was exempt from care between the hours of midnight and morning. Whatever was behind that door, the protocol was to ignore it, to let it press the button and receive no answer. And what bothered me most was the implication buried in that protocol. The call light meant something in that room was awake. Something in that room wanted attention, and the people who'd worked this floor for years had decided collectively and firmly that the safest response was to pretend it didn't exist. By 4 in the morning, I was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. It was a mental fatigue, the kind that comes from sustained low-grade anxiety. I'd been on edge for hours, and the adrenaline was metabolizing into something heavy and gray. I was sitting at the nurse's station staring at nothing when I heard it. My name. Someone said my name.
It came from down the hallway, from the direction of room 307. It was clear, distinct, and spoken in a voice I did not recognize. A calm voice, polite even, like someone getting your attention in a waiting room. Just my first name, spoken once, with a slight upward inflection at the end. Like a question. Like, "Are you there?" I gripped the edge of the counter. Dolores was in the break room. I was alone at the station. The hallway stretched out in front of me, dim and empty, and at the far end, the closed door of room 307 was just barely visible. My name again, a little louder this time. And then, after a pause, a sentence. "I need help. Can you come here, please?" The voice was calm, reasonable. It sounded like a normal person making a normal request. There was nothing overtly wrong with it, nothing monstrous or distorted. It sounded like a tired patient who was in discomfort and wanted assistance. And that was what made it so hard to resist, because every instinct I had as a caretaker, every reflex built into me by basic human empathy, was telling me to walk down that hallway and help. But I didn't. I sat at the station, and I didn't move. My hands were shaking. Not dramatically, just a fine tremor, like I'd had too much coffee. I stared at the hallway, and I waited. The voice spoke again, and this time there was a thread of something new in it. A texture I can only describe as patience. Not frustration, not anger. Patience. Like it had all the time in the world, like it knew with absolute certainty that eventually I would come. "I know you're there. I can hear you breathing." I stopped breathing. I don't mean that figuratively. I literally held my breath. I sat there, lungs burning, until I couldn't hold it anymore, and when I finally exhaled, the hallway was silent again. I stayed at the station until Dolores came back. She looked at me, and something in my face must have told her what had happened, because she sat down next to me and put her hand on my arm. Just briefly, a gesture of solidarity. "First time's the worst," she said. "It knew my name. It always knows the new ones' names." I wanted to ask how. I wanted to ask what it was. I wanted to ask 100 questions. But Dolores had already turned away, and I understood that the answers she had wouldn't help me. They wouldn't make it make sense. The only thing that made sense was the list.
The rest of the shift passed without incident. At 6:30, the day shift began arriving. The atmosphere on the floor changed almost immediately, like someone had opened a window.
The heaviness lifted. Voices filled the hallways, machines beeped, carts rattled. The hospital became a hospital again, instead of whatever it had been during the night. I clocked out at 7. I walked to my car in the early morning light and sat behind the wheel for a long time before turning the key. The sun was coming up. Birds were singing. Everything was normal and bright and exactly as it should have been, and I felt like I was returning from somewhere very far away. I went back the next night, and the night after that. I'm not sure why. Partly because I needed the money, partly because something in me needed to prove that I could handle it, and partly, if I'm being completely honest, because I was curious. Not curious enough to break the rules, but curious enough to keep showing up. Over the next 2 weeks, I settled into a routine. The nights followed a pattern. The first few hours were always normal. Then, around midnight, the shift would happen. That atmospheric drop. The silence thickened. The hallway became something more than a hallway. And the phenomena would begin. Footsteps, call lights, occasionally the figure on the camera, and always, at some point between 2 and 4 in the morning, the voice from room 307. It didn't call my name every night. Some nights it was quiet, but on the nights it spoke, it was always the same. Calm, polite, reasonable, asking for help, asking me to come. And each time, I didn't go. I followed the list, I logged in, I sat at the station, and I waited for it to stop. But here's the thing about sustained exposure to something abnormal. It starts to erode your frame of reference. The first night, the voice from 307 was terrifying. By the 5th night, it was deeply unsettling. By the 10th night, it was almost routine. And that's when it becomes dangerous, because routine breeds complacency, and complacency is where the cracks form. I started paying closer attention to the other staff. Camille, I noticed, never walked past room 307 if she could avoid it. She'd take the long way around, going through the central corridor and coming back up the other side of the L, adding 5 minutes to any trip. She did this automatically, without seeming to think about it, the way you'd walk around a puddle on the sidewalk. Dolores was less avoidant, but more vigilant. She'd walk past the room, but quickly, and always with her eyes forward, never looking at the door, never slowing down. I asked around carefully, not about 307 specifically, because Rule 8 said not to discuss the patient with other patients, and I extended that to mean I should be discreet with staff too. But I asked general questions. How long have you been on this floor? Has it always been like this? That sort of thing. From a maintenance worker named Hector, I learned that room 307 was the only room on the floor that the maintenance team was not allowed to service. Plumbing, electrical, HVAC, everything was handled by an outside contractor that came once a month, always during the day, always with an escort from hospital administration. From a phlebotomist who sometimes drew blood on the 3rd floor during early morning hours, I learned that she had standing orders to skip 307 entirely, no blood draws, no vitals, nothing. From a young nurse named Darnell, who worked on the 2nd floor but sometimes covered shifts on the 3rd, I learned that the day shift staff who attended to 307 were a tight group of 3. They'd been doing it for years. They were paid significantly more than other nurses at their level, and they never, ever talked about what they did in that room. Darnell had tried to ask once, casually, over lunch,
and the nurse he'd asked had looked at him with what he described as genuine pity and said, "Sweetheart, let it be." I let it be. For a while. The night that changed everything was a Thursday, about 3 weeks into my employment. It started like any other shift, the usual quiet hours, the usual midnight transition, the usual sense of the building contracting around itself. But something was different. I could feel it. The air had a charge to it. The silence was deeper. The shadows in the hallway seemed to have more weight. Dolores felt it too. I could tell because she was more terse than usual, more focused. She checked the locks on the supply closet twice. She made sure every door on the floor was properly closed. At one point, she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It took me a moment to recognize it. It was fear. Not the low-grade unease that was standard operating procedure on the night shift. Actual fear. Stay close to the station tonight. Don't go wandering. I didn't wander. I stayed within sight of the nurse's station and did my work. But around 1 in the morning, things began to escalate. It started with the lights. The fluorescence in the corridor began to flicker, not all at once, but in sequence, like a wave rolling down the hallway from the far end toward us. The flickering would last about 10 seconds and then stop. And then a minute later, it would happen again. Each time, the waves started from the area near room 307 and moved toward us. Then, the temperature dropped. I don't mean it got slightly cooler. I mean I could see my breath. In the middle of a heated hospital, in the middle of spring, I could see my breath forming small clouds in front of my face. Dolores pulled on a cardigan and didn't comment on it. At 1:30, every call light on the floor activated again. But this time, they didn't go off. They stayed on. The panel at the nurse's station was lit up like a Christmas tree, all 16 rooms pinging at once, a soft cacophony of chimes that Dolores silenced manually, one by one, working through them with the mechanical efficiency of someone defusing a bomb. As she cleared each one, it would stay dark for about 30 seconds and then light up again. She silenced them again and again. This went on for about 15 minutes before it stopped. And then the whispering started. Not from the direction of 307 this time. From everywhere. From the walls, from the ceiling, from the floor. A low, susurrant murmur, like dozens of voices speaking just below the threshold of intelligibility. I looked at Dolores. She was sitting very still, her hands flat on the counter, her eyes closed. "Just wait," she said quietly. "It passes." We waited. The whispering rose in volume, and for a moment I could almost make out words, fragments of sentences, scraps of meaning that dissolved before I could grasp them. And then it stopped. All at once, like someone had pressed a mute button. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I've ever experienced. At 2 in the morning, room 307's call light activated. Dolores silenced it. It activated again immediately. She silenced it. It activated again. This time, she didn't silence it. She just looked at the light on the panel, glowing steadily, and I saw her jaw tighten. "It's gonna be a long night," she said. At 2:15, the door to room 307 opened. I know this because I heard it, that distinct sound of a heavy hospital door swinging open on its hinges, a soft creak, a whisper of air, and then silence. I was at the station. The hallway monitor showed the corridor, and I looked at it just in time to see the door to room 307 standing open. Just open. The room beyond was dark. The camera angle didn't allow me to see inside, just the open door in the darkness beyond it, a rectangle of black in the gray hallway. Dolores picked up the phone and dialed a number. She spoke quietly. "This is 3rd floor east. We have a situation. The door is open." I don't know who she was calling. Security, maybe. Administration. Someone. She listened for a moment, then hung up. "Stay here," she said. And then she did something I didn't expect. She stood up, walked to the station's supply drawer, and took out a roll of medical tape. She tore off a long strip and pressed it over her ears, not blocking them completely, just muffling them. She saw me watching. "Do the same," she said. "Now." I did. I tore off 2 strips of tape and pressed them over my ears. The world became muffled, distant, like I was underwater. I could still hear, but everything was dulled. Dolores nodded, and then she walked down the hallway toward room 307. I watched her go. She moved steadily, not fast, not slow. Her posture was rigid. She reached the door, and without looking inside, she gripped the handle and pulled it shut. The latch clicked. She held the handle for a moment, and then she walked back to the station. When she returned, she sat down and peeled the tape off her ears. I did the same. Her hands were trembling. Not a lot, just enough for me to notice.
"What's in that room, Dolores?" She was quiet for a long time. "I've seen it once," she said. "5 years ago. The door opened, like tonight, and I was young and foolish, and I looked. The room was dark, but there was a shape in the bed. A person, or something shaped like a person. It was lying under the blankets, and it turned its head to look at me, and it smiled." She paused. "It had my face," she said. "It was lying there in that bed, and it had my face, and it smiled at me with my own smile. And then it opened its mouth, and it said, in my voice, in my exact voice, 'Come in, we've been waiting for you.'" She let that sit for a moment. I closed the door. I went back to the station. I called the administration. They sent someone. By morning, the door was closed and everything was back to normal, and I never looked again. "We?" That's what it said. We. We didn't speak again for the rest of the shift. The remaining hours were quiet. Whatever had been building all night seemed to have dissipated after Dolores closed the door. By the time the day shift arrived, the floor felt ordinary again. Normal. Safe. The door to 307 was closed. The call light was off. It was as if nothing had happened. I drove home that morning, and I sat in my apartment, and I thought very seriously about quitting. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the money I needed, and the bills I had, and the fact that jobs weren't easy to come by. And I thought about Dolores, who had been doing this for 19 years, who had seen what she'd seen and kept showing up. If she could do it, I told myself, then so could I. I went back the next night, and the next, but something had shifted. I was more aware, more alert, and I started noticing things I hadn't noticed before. I noticed that the floor plan posted by the elevator didn't include room 307. It showed 306 and then 308, as if 307 didn't exist.
I asked Dolores about this, and she gave me a look that I can only describe as resigned. "The records have been like that as long as I've been here," she said. "The room is there, the patient is there, but on paper, neither one exists. I stopped asking why a long time ago."
I didn't stop asking. I couldn't. I went to the hospital's administration office during the day on my own time and asked to see the floor plans for the 3rd floor of the East Wing. The clerk pulled them up on her computer and showed me. The plans showed 16 rooms, 301 through 306 on one side, 308 through 316 on the other. No 307. I asked her if there had ever been room 307. She looked confused. She said the building had always been numbered that way. "Some floors skip numbers," she said. "It's not unusual, like hotels that don't have a 13th floor." But I'd been in that hallway. I stood outside that door. I'd heard the voice on the other side of it. The room was real. The door was real. And something inside it was real too, whatever it was. I lasted 2 more weeks after that night. The shifts followed their usual pattern. The call light activated. I followed the list. I did my job. But there was a new element now, something that had started the night the door opened and didn't go away. I started seeing things. Not on the floor, not at the hospital. At home. It started with my bathroom mirror. I'd be brushing my teeth and I'd catch something in my peripheral vision, a flicker, a suggestion of movement behind my reflection, like someone passing by in a room behind me that didn't exist. I'd look directly at the mirror and see nothing but my own face, but for that split second, there was something else there, something that wasn't me. Then it was the windows. At night, when the lights were on inside and the glass became a dark mirror, I'd see shapes in the reflection that didn't correspond to anything in the room. A figure standing in the corner, a hand resting on the back of a chair, always in the periphery, always gone when I looked directly. I told myself it was sleep deprivation. Working the night shift does things to your circadian rhythm, and I wasn't sleeping well during the day. I was averaging maybe 4 hours, and it was broken, restless sleep, full of dreams that I couldn't remember, but that left me feeling exhausted. It was reasonable to think that my mind was playing tricks on me. I wanted to think that. But then, the phone calls started. The first one came on a Tuesday afternoon, about an hour before I was due to leave for my shift. My phone rang. In the caller ID showed the hospital's main number. I answered, assuming it was something about scheduling. "Hello?" Silence. Not dead air. Active silence. The kind where you can tell someone is on the other end, breathing, listening. "Hello? This is... I know who you are." The voice was calm, polite, familiar. It was the voice from room 307. I recognized it immediately, the same measured tone, the same unnatural patience. But now it was on my phone, in my apartment, in my life. "We miss you when you leave," it said. "We wish you'd come visit." I hung up. My hands were shaking badly enough that I dropped the phone on the floor. I picked it up and checked the call log. The number was the hospital's main line. I called it back. The switchboard answered. I asked if anyone had just called me from the hospital. They said no. No outgoing calls had been placed to my number. I called in sick that night, and the next night. On the 3rd day, I drove to the hospital during the afternoon and went to the HR office. I told the same distracted woman who'd hired me that I was resigning, effective immediately. She barely looked up.
She had me sign a form. She asked if I wanted to specify a reason. I said personal. She nodded. That was it. I walked out of the hospital, and I never went back inside. But here's the thing, and this is the part that keeps me up at night. More than the voice, more than the footsteps, more than anything I saw or heard on the third floor. This is the part I can't let go of. About a month after I quit, I looked up St. Albans Regional Medical Center online. I was looking for something, anything, that might help me make sense of what I had experienced. News articles, maybe? Forum posts? Anything. And I found the hospital's website, and I navigated to their facilities page, and I looked at the floor plan for the third floor of the East Wing. There were 15 rooms, not 16. 301 through 315. No room 307. No room 316. The numbering didn't skip, it just ended sooner. The hallway, according to the map, was shorter than I remembered. There was no L shape. It was a straight corridor with rooms on both sides, terminating at a window. I drove to the hospital. I sat in the parking lot and looked up at the building. I counted the windows on the third floor. I counted them 3 times. The count matched the floor plan on the website. The hallway was a straight corridor. There was no bend. There was no L. There was no far end where room 307 should have been. I sat in my car and I felt something I've never felt before. Not fear, something worse. The feeling of a memory that doesn't fit reality. The feeling of knowing something happened to you, remembering it clearly and specifically, and being confronted with evidence that the place where it happened doesn't exist and may never have existed. I tried calling Dolores. I still had her number from the shift schedule. The number was disconnected. I looked up the hospital's staff directory online. There was no Dolores listed on the third floor. There was no Camille. There was no record of either of them.
I tried searching for my own employment record. I called HR and asked them to confirm that I'd worked there. The woman on the phone checked and said she had no record of anyone by my name. I'd never been employed at St. Albans Regional Medical Center. According to them, I'd never been there at all. That was 6 months ago. I've tried to move on. I have a new job, daytime, at a hardware store. Normal hours, normal work. I sleep at night now, or I try to. Some nights are better than others. But 2 weeks ago, something happened that made me decide to finally tell this story. I was at home making dinner, and my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I don't know why I did. Habit, maybe. Or maybe something else. I picked it up. Hello? There was a pause, and then a voice. Calm, polite, patient. We've been trying to reach you, it said. Your room is ready. We saved it for you. A beat of silence. Room 307. I hung up. I stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, and the light above the stove flickered once, and in the dark window over the sink, just for a moment, I saw a face that wasn't mine looking back at me. It was smiling. I don't work at a hospital anymore. I don't go near hospitals if I can help it. I sleep with the lights on, and I've covered every mirror in my apartment, and I don't answer calls from numbers I don't recognize. But sometimes, late at night, when the building is quiet and the world outside my window is dark, I hear something, very faint, almost imperceptible, a sound like breathing on the other side of a wall, patient, steady, waiting. And every now and then, I hear my name. I don't answer. I follow the rules. I always follow the rules now.
But here's what terrifies me, the thing I can't stop thinking about, the thing that made me finally decide to tell someone. The voice is getting closer. It used to come from far away, muffled, like it was still in that hallway, still behind that door. But week by week, night by night, it's getting closer. Like whatever is in room 307 is no longer content to wait for me to come to it. It's coming to me.
And I think when it gets here, it's going to open a door that I can't close. And it's going to smile at me with my own face. And it's going to say, in my own voice, "We've been waiting for you." And this time, there won't be a list of rules to save me. I don't know what Patient 307 is. I don't know if it was ever human. I don't know if room 307 was ever real, or if it's real now in some way that I can't see, in some space that I can't access, folded into the architecture of a building that remembers a shape it no longer has. All I know is that there's something out there that knows my name, something patient, something that smiles, and it's still waiting.